Arizona Territory, 1883. The sun was already brutal by mid-morning, burning the desert sky white as bone. Brandon Lattimer pulled his horse to a stop, squinting toward the horizon. His canteen was near empty, but that was not what made his stomach twist. It was the shape crumpled near the old well, half covered in dust, still as stone. He swung down, boots hitting the cracked earth hard. "Hey," he called out, voice rough from the dry heat. No movement. He jogged the last few yards, heart thudding hard. It was a woman. She was face down beside the broken stones of the well, her skin flushed and dry, lips cracked. Her dress was torn on one side, the fabric worn and sun-bleached. Brandon dropped to his knees beside her, pressing 2 fingers gently to her neck. A weak pulse. "Thank God," he muttered. He pulled his canteen from the saddle, lifted her head carefully, and touched the metal to her lips. The water leaked into her mouth. She stirred. "Easy," he said. "Just a little." Her eyelids fluttered open, unfocused. "Water." "I've got you," he answered, easing more down her throat. She coughed, tried to sit up, but he steadied her. "You are safe now, do not move too fast." She blinked, her voice a whisper. "Where?" "About 10 miles east of Cactus Ridge. Name's Brandon Lattimer. I found you by this old well." She looked around, eyes wide, confused. Then her gaze locked onto his. Something there hit him like a blow, like he had been walking empty for years and just now realized it. "I thought I was going to die out here," she said, voice hoarse. "You are not dying today," he said. "Not if I can help it." She tried to sit up again, and this time he helped her. Her head rested against his arm, and she closed her eyes, breathing slow. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Vera," she whispered. "Vera Reddin." "Well, Vera Reddin," he said. "You are coming with me." He lifted her carefully and carried her to his horse. She was light, too light, like she had not eaten in days. He mounted behind her, holding her steady against his chest, and turned his horse west. They rode in silence across the flat land, the heat pressing down like a weight. Vera leaned against him, barely conscious, her breath warm against his neck. Brandon kept one arm around her waist, guiding the reins with the other. He had made dozens of rides across this stretch of land, but suddenly it felt like the most important one of his life. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was low. He dismounted, carried her inside, and laid her on the small bed in the corner. The cabin was one-room wood walls, a stove, a table, a rocking chair, but it was clean and quiet. He set a kettle on the stove, then dipped a cloth in cool water and pressed it to her forehead. She stirred. "You are safe," he said again. Her eyes opened clearer now. "You live alone?" "Yeah. Been out here a few years. Used to run cattle farther north, but this land suits me better." She nodded, her eyes taking in the cabin. "Thank you," she said softly, "for stopping, for not leaving me there." Brandon gave a small shake of his head. "No one should die beside a dried-up well." She looked at him again, and he felt it hit him a second time how easily he could fall into her eyes, how something inside him had shifted the moment she spoke his name. The kettle hissed. He poured water into a tin cup, brought it to her. "Slow," he said, helping her hold it. She drank, and color crept back into her face. She leaned back against the pillow. "I was trying to get to Fort Lowell. I thought I could make it across the flats. I was wrong." "What is in Fort Lowell, my sister?" "Or she was there last I heard." "Her husband worked with the quartermaster. I had nowhere else to go." Brandon sat beside the bed, his brow furrowed. "How long were you out there?" 2 days, maybe 3. I ran out of food the first night. My horse dropped dead from the heat." He nodded slowly, then asked, "You said you had nowhere else to go. What happened?" Vera looked away, her hands twisted in her lap. "My husband died last spring, pneumonia. We lived in La Junta. After he passed, his brother claimed the land. Said I had no right to it." Brandon's jaw clenched. "That is not right." "No," she agreed, "but it happened anyway. I took what I could carry and left, thought I could make it to my sister." Brandon watched her. She was still pale, still weak, but there was a quiet strength in her voice. He felt something stir deep in his chest, something protective, something more. "You are welcome to stay here until you are strong enough to travel," he said. "If you still want to go." She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Brandon." He stood, clearing his throat. "I will fix something to eat." She watched him cross the room, and something in her eyes softened. That night, Vera slept in the bed beneath a quilt while Brandon sat in the chair by the stove, watching the fire fade. He could still feel her weight against him from the ride. Still hear her voice when she whispered his name. He had given her water beside that dried up well, but it felt like he had given her more than that. It felt like he had given her his soul. The next morning came gentle, with a pale light filtering through the chinks in the cabin walls. Brandon had risen before dawn, moving quietly so the creaking floorboards wouldn't wake her. He'd stepped outside into the cool stillness, gathering kindling and filling the washbasin from the rain barrel. When he came back in, she was sitting up, legs drawn beneath the quilt, her hair loosed over one shoulder. "You're up," he said softly, setting the basin on the table. "I didn't mean to sleep so long," she answered, rubbing her temples. "My head feels like it's full of cotton." He poured a cup of bean broth from the pot warming on the stove. "You needed the rest. Here, it's not much, but it'll go down easy." She took the cup with both hands, a small nod of thanks. "Didn't expect to wake up under a roof. You didn't strike me as someone who gives up easy." Vera gave a quiet exhale that might have been a laugh. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed, "but I'd like to." She looked at him over the rim of the tin cup, the silence stretched, not uncomfortable. "Just full." He ran a hand through his beard, then turned toward the door. "I'll check the traps. Won't be long." He left her with the warmth of the stove and the crackle of the fire, stepping out into the morning where the mesquite cast long shadows across the hard, packed earth. The traps had been set near the dry arroyo mostly for rabbits, enough to keep the larder from going bare. He found two, brought them back, and dressed them behind the shed. By the time he came inside again, she'd moved to the rocking chair. Her face was still pale but less drawn, and her hands rested steady in her lap. "I can help with something," she said. "You can sit," he replied. "That's help enough for today." She hesitated, then said, "I've sewn before. Mended. If you've things that need tending." "There's a pile of shirts with torn elbows in that chest over there," he said, indicating it with his chin. "I've not had time to see to them." She opened the chest, drew out a faded work shirt, and began threading a needle. He watched her fingers, quick and sure despite the bruises on her knuckles. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing a small scar along her forearm, pale and old. "From when I was 12, she said, catching him looking. "Climbed a fence I shouldn't have. Got caught on barbed wire." He nodded. "I've got one almost the same. Branding iron slipped out of my hand. Caught me just above the knee. I guess we both learned something about sharp things. Mine was don't try to work cattle after 2 days without sleep." That got a quiet smile from her, the first real one. Later, while the meat cooked and the light shifted golden through the window, Brandon sat at the table sharpening his knife. Vera was still sewing, the pile of mended cloth growing. Her movements had slowed, but her shoulders were straighter. He cleared his throat. "If you want, I've got an extra saddle. When you're ready, I can ride with you to Fort Lowell." Her hand stilled. "I don't know if she's even there anymore. I haven't had a letter since February. We could ask around. If she's gone, someone might know where." She folded the shirt across her lap. "And if they don't, then you've still got a place here." She met his eyes then. "Why are you being kind to me?" He didn't answer right away. The knife made a soft rasp against the whetstone. "Because something in me went still the moment I laid eyes on you," he said finally. "I don't know what that means yet, but I know it's true." She didn't speak, but the air shifted between them, like something fragile had just been acknowledged. That night they sat outside beneath a sky scattered with stars. The cool came in slow, and Brandon passed her a wool blanket. She pulled it tight around her shoulders, watching the wind stir the low brush. "My husband used to sit out like this," she said. "He'd say God put more truth in the stars than in any preacher's sermon." Brandon leaned back against the porch post, arms resting on his knees. "Maybe he was right. He also said I was born stubborn and would die the same. That one I might believe." She turned her head, and though it was too dark to see her expression, he could feel the warmth of her gaze. "Brandon, yeah, I didn't think I'd live past yesterday. I know. I'm not sure what to do with today." He reached out, his hand closing gently over hers where it lay beside him on the porch step. "Start with breathing," he said. "And stay." The wind shifted that afternoon, carrying the scent of creosote and dust. Vera stood just outside the cabin, one hand pressed to the doorframe as she watched Brandon work in the corral. He moved with quiet precision, repairing a broken fence rail, his shirt pulled loose at the collar and damp at the shoulders. She hadn't asked what he did before this place, but she could see the history in his hands, steady, calloused, marked by labor. She stepped down onto the hard, packed earth, the blanket from the night before folded over one arm. "This yours?" she asked, holding it out. He glanced up, brushed the hair from his brow with the back of his wrist. "It is. But you can keep it if the nights are still too cold." "I'll be fine," she said. "It's warm enough in there." A pause. "I was thinking I could help with the garden, if you've got one." He leaned against the post with a faint tilt of his head. "Behind the shed. Rows are marked, but the last frost came late, so it's patchy. I meant to replant, just hadn't yet." She nodded once and turned without another word, her boots crunching softly as she walked. The garden was small, hemmed in with plain wooden stakes and twine. She knelt and began loosening the soil with her fingers, pulling out the brittle shoots that hadn't taken. Her nails filled with grit, and the sun pushed the back of her neck warm, but it steadied her something clean and forward-looking. Brandon joined her near midday, carrying a tin pail with what seeds he had left. He crouched beside her, passing the pouch without ceremony. "You ever keep a garden before?" he asked. "My father did," she said. "In Arkansas, before the war, he grew beans and tobacco mostly. I used to sit beside him and watch. I didn't understand how something could come out of nothing." "You do now?" "No," she said, "but I don't mind the mystery." They worked without speaking for a while, shoulders brushing now and again as they moved from row to row. The soil was dry but not hopeless. She found herself pressing deeper, carving little furrows, planting careful and measured. He followed, covering the seeds with that same quiet care he'd shown her since the moment he found her. Later, when the sun tilted westward, she stood and brushed the dust from her skirt. "What brought you out here, Brandon?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes trailed across the horizon, where the land rose in low ridges and the mesquite shimmered with heat. "I was supposed to inherit a ranch near the Cimarron," he said. "My brother was managing it, and I was off working freight lines. When I came back, he'd gambled it into debt, lost everything. I tried to stay, but it wasn't mine anymore." She didn't press him. She only said, "So you came south, found this patch, built the cabin with my own hands, figured I'd keep to myself for a while." "And did you?" "I did," he said, "until a woman fell out of the sky beside a dry well." Vera laughed, soft and surprised. She turned toward him, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "I wasn't falling, I was crawling." "Either way," he said, "you changed something." That night, she cooked onions and beans over the stove while Brandon cleaned his rifle at the table. The cabin smelled sharp, earthy. He watched her move, shoulders straighter, steps more certain. She dipped a spoon into the pot and tasted, then glanced over. "Your turn to eat something decent," she said. "It smells like something decent," he replied. When they sat, he passed her a slice of cornbread from the tin. She broke it in half before taking a bite. "You keep everything simple," she said. "Don't see the sense in complicating what works." "I used to believe that too," she said, "before things got taken." He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. She swallowed, set her spoon down. "I didn't just lose the land," she said. "He took my mare, my mother's ring. Even the quilt she stitched when I was a girl, said it all belonged to the family now, not to me." Brandon's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "You remember the pattern." "Of course I do." "Then it still belongs to you." Her throat caught a little and she looked down at her hands. "No one's ever said it like that. I'm not no one, Vera." She met his gaze then, and something settled between them, not spoken, but understood. She rose to clear the bowls, and he stood too, reaching for them at the same time. Their fingers touched, and neither pulled away. "You don't have to go to Fort Lowell," he said quietly. She looked at their joined hands. "I know. I've got enough here for 2 people, maybe not much more." "But enough." She stepped closer, eyes steady. "Then maybe I'll stay until I plant something that grows." He lifted her hand to his chest, resting it there without pressure. "That's all I want." Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the fire burned low. And for the first time in a long while, Vera no longer felt like she was passing through someone else's life. She felt like she was stepping into her own. Rain came thin and steady that night, tapping soft against the cabin roof and trailing down the window glass like breath. Vera stood barefoot near the stove, drying her hair with the edge of a flour sack. She'd stepped outside just long enough to feel the water on her face, and now the scent of wet earth clung to her skin. Brandon was at the table, working a strip of leather through a buckle, mending the strap on one of his packs. He looked up when she crossed the room. "You'll catch cold." "I won't," she said, folding the cloth over the back of a chair. "Not after weeks in the sun." "This feels like mercy." He set the leather aside. "You always talk that way," her brow lifted slightly. "Is there something wrong in it? Only that it makes the rest of us sound plain." She moved to the hearth, crouching to stir the coals until they glowed hotter. "It's just how I learned to think. My mother taught me to notice the small things. Said that's where God hides the real gifts." Brandon leaned back in the chair, folding his arms. "What else did she teach you? To keep a knife in my boot and never trust a man who can't keep his word." "That's fair advice. She also said love don't need to be loud to be strong, that it shows up in the quiet ways." She glanced at him. "Did yours teach you anything like that?" He tapped his fingers against the table's edge. "Mine was gone before I could ask much of her. Vera didn't ask how or when. The way he spoke told her enough that it had been early, and it had left a hollow that never quite filled in." She rose and took a seat across from him. The firelight flickered over the curve of her cheek. "Do you miss cattle work?" "No," he said. "I miss the horses, but not the rest. Too many men with quick hands and slow minds." She smiled faintly. "You like things slow. I like things steady." They sat in the hush that followed, the only sound the soft patter of rain and the low hiss of the fire. Then she reached for the leather strap he'd been working and turned it over in her hands. "You've done good work here," she said. "This place, this land, it's not much maybe, but it's honest. That's all I ever wanted. Somewhere I didn't have to answer to anyone but the sun and the soil." She traced the stitching with her thumb. "And now there's someone else here." He didn't look away. "I don't mind." She set the strap down. "I've been thinking about the letter I never sent. To your sister," she nodded. "I had it with me, tucked in my skirt pocket. I wrote it the day I left. Told her I was coming, that maybe we could start again. But I never got far enough to send it. Do you want to now?" "I don't think I need to anymore." She paused. "I thought I was heading toward something, but maybe I was heading away." Brandon stood and moved closer. She didn't flinch, didn't shift. Just watched him as he came to rest beside her chair. "I've got no promises to offer," he said. "No land deeds or long plans." She reached up, her fingers curling gently around his. "I don't want any of that." "Then what do you want?" Her voice was quiet. "This, whatever this is. As long as it's real." He crouched beside her, his hand still in hers. The firelight caught the lines around his eyes, the earth-ground steadiness of him. He didn't move to kiss her, didn't reach for more. Just stayed close, anchoring her in the moment. "I'll build a second room," he said. "Before summer sets in, you'll want space of your own. I'd rather help build it." They stayed there until the fire burned low, the rain easing to a hush outside. She let her head rest against his shoulder and he closed his eyes, neither said the word for it. But it settled between them, all the same quiet, strong, and lasting. By late June, the skies had begun to shift, clouds rising slow and heavy in the afternoons, the first hints of monsoon season pressing against the air. The land waited, brittle and hushed, but inside the cabin, the rhythm of two people building a life had settled into something steady. Vera stood beneath the frame of the new room, the floor planks freshly laid and smelling of sawdust and sap. She ran her fingers along the edge of the window frame Brandon had carved with a small notch at the corner, a place to rest her wedding band. He'd said, once she had one. "You think it'll hold through the storms?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder where he stood with a measuring rod balanced against his palm. "I know it will," he said. "I've never built anything with someone in mind before." "It makes you careful." She stepped back down into the main room, brushing sawdust from her skirts. "I'd like to sew curtains for it, something light, maybe blue," he nodded. "You'll have to pick the cloth when we ride into town next week." Vera studied him a moment, then asked, "Do you mind going back? Cactus Ridge don't hold much for me. But if you need thread, I'll ride as far as Tucson." She smiled, but it faded as she sat down at the table and opened a folded sheet of paper. "I got a letter back from the quartermaster's wife." Brandon set the rod aside. "Your sister, gone east. Her husband was discharged last month." No forwarding address. He pulled out the chair across from her and waited. I thought I'd feel more when I read it, she said, but it was just stillness, like I already knew. You don't have to go looking anymore, he said, I know. And I don't want to. She reached across the table, laying her hand over his thumb brushed over her knuckles. There's something I need to ask, she said, not because I doubt you. Just because I want to be sure. Ask it. If I marry you, it won't be because you feel like you owe me anything. No, he said. It'll be because I've never known peace like what I have with you. Because every day you've been here, I've felt more like myself than I ever did before. She nodded, her throat tightening. Then I'd like to stay. For good. He stood, stepped behind her chair, and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She leaned back into him, her hands resting over his forearm. There's a preacher who comes through the ridge every third Sunday, he said quietly. We can meet him there next week. She tilted her head to look up at him. And after, he brushed her hair back, after we come back here. And we keep building. They married beneath a cottonwood tree behind the town's chapel, the preacher's voice low, the witnesses few. Vera wore a simple sage dress she'd sewn from leftover bolts in the general store, and the ring Brandon gave her was carved from silver he'd traded for 2 pelts and a promise. They rode home in silence, but it was the kind made of knowing, not distance. At the cabin, he lifted her down from the saddle, and she kept her hands at his shoulders longer than needed. That night, the storms finally broke, rain falling hard and steady across the roof. She stood barefoot in the doorway, the hem of her dress damp, watching the lightning flash across the flats. Brandon came up behind her, wrapping a blanket around them both. You still like the rain. I love it, she said. It feels like it's washing away everything that came before. He kissed the side of her neck, slow and sure. Then let it. They made their bed in the new room, the window open to the sound of water and wind. She fell asleep with his hand resting over hers, the warmth of him steady behind her. Months passed. The beans in the garden took root, and the squash crept over the edges of the beds. Vera stitched curtains for every window, blue and pale and fluttering in the breeze. Brandon built a chicken coop from scrap lumber, and they traded eggs for coffee and sugar. On quiet mornings, she read aloud from a tattered book she'd carried in the bottom of her travel sack. In the evenings, they sat on the porch with their feet bare and the sun drawing long across the land. One morning in early December, she pressed his hand to her belly, her eyes bright. He didn't speak, just pulled her close and held her for a long while, his breath pressed into her hair. When he finally looked at her, there was nothing but certainty in his face. I'll build another room, he said. She laughed, and he kissed her. The cabin held through every season, through wind and rain, through the long hush of winter and the burst of spring. Their child was born the following summer beneath the same cottonwood where they were wed. A girl, quiet and curious, who watched the world with her mother's eyes and clung to her father's thumb like it was the only thing that made sense. They never left the land, never needed to. And every morning, before the sun broke over the ridges, Brandon would wake and watch his wife sleeping, one hand curled beneath her pillow, the other resting on the space between them. And every night she would lie beside him, her breath even and soft, knowing that nothing from her past could reach her here. They had built something lasting, something strong, and it held. Forever.